Interested in selling with tenants? How have things changed since the eviction moratorium is over? Should a landlord sell with tenants in place or vacant? Plus, we're going to cover a building type that should have tenants in place or could make it more difficult to sell. And what if a tenant isn't paying rent? Can a landlord still sell? We're going to cover this and a whole lot more in our updated Selling with Tenants Through 2022 video. Hey there, Christian Walsh, real estate agent with Wire Associates. We've been helping tenants and landlords and buyers and sellers navigate these crazy days in California and beyond. And we're here with a big update on our Selling with Tenants videos. We've done a couple of others on how landlords can sell during these crazy days. And now that most of the eviction moratoria are over, things have changed. And remember, we can't give tax or legal advice, but for the most honest and up-to-date real estate advice, subscribe to this channel. And a few important points before we get started. While we're going to discuss the state of California, in general, what we're talking about will cover most other states. Make sure you do the research to know your local regulations. Another important point is there are still some local eviction moratoria in place throughout the country and throughout the state of California. For example, Los Angeles City and Los Angeles County still, as of shooting this video, have an eviction moratorium in place. So make sure you understand the local regulations and how they pertain to selling with tenants. During the eviction moratorium, if a landlord needed to sell, they would often be forced to sell with a tenant in place, even if that tenant wasn't paying rent. So it was very difficult times, but things have changed. So if you're ready to dive into Selling with Tenants through 2022, hit that like button and let's get started. An important first consideration when selling a rental property is whether the tenant or tenants are on a lease or they're month to month. So if the tenant or tenants are on a lease, the new owner will have to honor the terms of the lease. Otherwise, if the owner wants to sell it vacant, in this case, the owner will have to use cash for keys. And cash for keys, we've done other videos on this, essentially is a lump sum of cash that the owner can give to the tenant in exchange for the tenant to allow the lease to end early. It's completely optional for the landlord and completely optional for the tenant to accept. Now, if the tenant is month to month, the landlord may be able to terminate the tenancy in order to sell the property vacant. Advantages to not having a tenant in a rental property when selling is that it makes it easier to show. So a potential buyer can go by with their agent at any point in time and doesn't have to give proper 24-hour notice to go. Additionally, there's more control over how clean the property is. Maybe an owner wants to do some staging, do some repairs, etc. When the property is vacant, there's more control for the owner over the property. Additionally, for certain property types, if it's vacant, it's going to open it up to a larger pool of buyers. So specifically for single-family homes, condos, and townhomes, if there isn't a tenant in place, it opens it up to non-investors, owner-occupants, first-time home buyers, etc. So having it vacant in this case would potentially net a seller much more money. This again applies to condos, townhomes, and single-family homes. And what properties would there be slightly less advantage to having a vacant unit? That's duplexes and anything larger. So it's okay if a unit's vacant in this case because that's a unit in the building that could be shown to potential buyers. And additionally, that unit can be rented out for top of market. You can get market rent for that unit and you can leave it up to the buyer to do that. So there are some small advantages in this case, but you definitely don't need to go out of your way terminating a tenancy and getting a tenant out in a duplex or larger in order to sell the property for top dollar. So buildings that are completely vacant, and specifically triplexes, fourplexes, and larger, it may actually be very difficult to get financing in this case. So we don't necessarily recommend selling an empty building, but we've had to do it before, and there are certain cases where it does make more sense to get it on the market and let the new owner lease it up completely. So as mentioned, the eviction moratorium was forcing landlords, if they were going to sell with a tenant in place and maybe even a tenant who wasn't paying rent. In order to do this, landlords were often taking a haircut in prices. Now that the eviction moratorium is over in California and most parts of the United States, it is easier for landlords to sell a property, particularly a property without the tenant in place. So now in the state of California, you can give give a 60-day notice to terminate tenancy. And this is for tenants who've been there for a year or longer. And we've done video content on this and walk you through the form that you can use as a landlord to terminate the tenancy and sell the property vacant. In the state of California, we have AB 1482, which is the Tenant Protection Act of 2019. And it's been in place since 2019, but it was easy to forget because of the pandemic going on. Essentially, it breaks properties down into exempt and subject to AB 1482. This bill covers residential properties throughout the state of California. Now be sure to check your local area to see if there's more strict just cause or relocation assistance regulations in place. But in general, in the state of California, under AB 1482, a rental property is considered exempt if it's a condo, townhome, single-family home, or an owner-occupied duplex, as long as a major corporation is not owner of the property. If exempt, a landlord is not subject to just cause termination of tenancy or having to pay tenant relocation. So now that the eviction moratorium is over, a landlord can simply terminate a tenancy and doesn't have to give a reason for the termination and doesn't owe any money in the case of an exempt property to the tenant. If a property is subject to AB 1482, so this is anything in a non-owner occupied duplex or larger residential building in the state of California, then there are specific just cause reasons to terminate a tenancy, and the tenant will be owed relocation assistance if the tenancy is terminated. And again, check the local area to see if there's more strict just cause regulations or additional relocation assistance fees required. We have a link at the end of this video to the 60-day notice that is required to terminate tenancy in the state of California. Make sure you stick around to the end to be able to review that. If you do decide to sell a property with the tenants in place, whether it's a house or condo, a duplex or bigger, should you tell the tenants that you're selling it? The answer is an emphatic yes. There's absolutely zero downside to letting the tenants know that the building's for sale. In fact, if you try to hide it and they find out on their own, usually it ends up to causing resistance to the sale and making life more difficult. So honesty is the best policy. We've sold plenty from houses on up to 10 to 12 units, and we always let the tenants know that the property's for sale before it hits the market. You are allowed to sell. There's no reason to hide it from the tenants. And the tenants must cooperate with showings and appointments as long as they're given correct legal notice. And has anything changed if the tenant isn't paying rent? Can you not sell? Are there any special processes? The short answer is no. If it's an AB 1482 exempt property, so a house or a condo where the tenant's not paying rent, a landlord can terminate tenancy for that tenant, and it isn't related to the non-payment of rent. Additionally, the rental assistance programs in the state of California will still give a landlord the back rent that's owed even if the tenant is not in place anymore. If you are forced to sell a tenant-occupied property with a non-paying tenant, it's very important that you disclose this to all potential buyers in order to protect yourself as the seller. And if you don't want to take the time to get the tenant out, whether the tenant is paying or not, be sure to reach out to us. We have a network of investors who are willing to take properties like this. So as you can tell, if you are interested in selling a tenant-occupied property, you're going to need to hire the right agent who understands the latest laws in California. So whether they're going to help you get the property vacant to sell or sell it with the tenant in place, you absolutely need an expert. You need to hire an agent who understands when a tenancy can be terminated, how it can be terminated, and if you can't, knows how to work with tenants to create a cooperative environment for the sale and understands laws related to signage, lockbox, showings, and more. It takes a lot to sell a tenant-occupied property for top dollar. Of course, we'd love to throw our hat in the ring and we can help you out in Southern California. And we have agents all throughout the state of California that can help. But make sure you hire the right professional who's going to understand the letter of the law and respect tenant rights so that you don't end up with a bigger problem than you can afford on your hands. Let us know in the comments below what questions you have about selling tenant-occupied properties, and I'd love to hear your war stories, how it went for you as a landlord or a tenant. Join almost 2,000 others who've subscribed to our free weekly email newsletter where we cover topics like this, plus a whole lot more for buyers and sellers and tenants and landlords. As promised, here is the 60-day notice video, as well as more information on cash for keys. Please go ahead and take a look at those. Thanks for tuning in. This has been Christian Walsh, Wire Associates, and we appreciate you.